This is Jamie Dyer welcoming you to another edition of the Watching the Wireless podcast, and my guest in this episode is talk radio presenter Darryl Morris. He's currently presenting 1 till 5 on Talk Radio, and soon to be weekends, but we'll get to that in just a moment. How long did it take you, as an experienced presenter, to get used to doing those overnight slots?
It's a very good question. Probably not that long, really, to be honest with you. It probably, I would say it took me a couple of months to feel really comfortable and to not feel, because the thing about that show on that kind of radio station is it's 4 hours in the middle of the night at the quietest time of the day, and it's a long time to fill when it's just you. So I have no co-presenter either, so it's just me on my own, and obviously we have guests. And it took me quite a long time. It took me a couple of months, I'd say, Jamie, before I got to a point of being able to say to the setup producer who works on the show during the daytime, if you cannot find a guest for this particular 15-minute slot, then don't worry about it. I'll just talk. That's the bit where you go, if a guest pulls out or something, we have some guests that are pre-recorded. We do a couple of hours of pre-recording, about an hour and a half or so before the show, for about 10:30. And then, because obviously if we want anybody that's in the UK, they're not going to stay up. So we need to record those people. And then, for the most part, and then the guests that are live tend to be international guests. So sometimes they pull out right at the last minute, or we can't get hold of them, or there's a technical problem. And on a couple of occasions, the producer will buzz in my ear and say, you've got 20 minutes. Can you just fill up to the top of the hour? And anybody who's worked in radio knows that it's a bit of it's a difficult situation. It's sort of the moment that you dread, isn't it? It's when you've got time to fill and you're not quite sure what to do. And then you're handed 20 minutes. And actually, arguably, 20 minutes is easier than 2, because you can go on a journey with 20 minutes, and you can kind of go around the houses a bit, and you can talk about things, and you can grab the papers and chat about the stories, and you can ruminate and kind of form an opinion on something out loud, which is quite a really nice thing to do. It's actually, it's a great skill to try and practice and to learn. 2 minutes, you think, I've got to be interesting and concise and you get it into this 2 minutes, which is actually much harder. So in answer to your question, sorry, I've gone around the houses there, but it took me probably a couple of months before I got to that point. And in terms of the sleeping pattern and the actual lifestyle, truly, you never really get used to that. That's just something that I have never really got a grip on. Probably, actually, that's a lie. I've probably got a grip on it since coming back up north, because obviously I did my show in London. The studios are in London, but since the coronavirus outbreak, we've been doing the show from a remote studio at Media City, which is around the corner from my house, because I actually live in the north of England. So I was living in London during the week and then coming back home at the weekends. And since coming back home, I've managed to live a much more stable life, I guess, and a stable lifestyle. So I've been able to get up at a reasonable time, do a bit of work, spend some time with my girlfriend, sort of like cuddle the cats and watch a bit of TV and have a normal life. And actually, that's really, really helped. I think the stuff that you do around the edges of the show, whereas previously I was getting home to my flat in London about 7-ish, staying up for an hour or two, sleeping until 4, 5, having something to eat, and then going to work. And it was just a relentless lifestyle that I could never have. I probably wouldn't have got this far if it weren't for the coronavirus outbreak. I probably would have crashed at about April this year, probably.
Yeah, I know that from posts that you put up on your official website that you did find that quite a job for a while, didn't you, to kind of maintain that, because there's so much going on in the world right now, even before the outbreak.
Yeah. So I think, are you referring to the post that I put up about taking a week off?
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah. So I took a week off. So I've never done this before. And obviously Ian Lee, who you know well as another former talk radio presenter, who I've come to know as a great friend in the last sort of year or so, has always been really open about his mental well-being, and also has been very unafraid to take a pause and take a stop and take some time off. So at the start of March this year, or mid-March this year, as the coronavirus crisis was starting to rumble towards us, I decided to do that. And I said in that post that I found that I was spending my entire night sat in front of television screens, talking about this huge news story that was really affecting me. I was very worried about my family, as we all are. We've all got family, and we've all got people that we're really concerned about in this period. And I found that sitting in a studio for several hours, I mean, it can be 8 hours by the time we've done pre-records and done the live bits of the show, talking about this news story, watching the rolling news, really took its toll on me, and not having anybody around that was in London with me, and doing this shift. And the key bit actually is waking up at 4 o'clock in the afternoon or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, or I've now managed to get it to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So I'm making great progress on that front, and having the day's news come at you like a steam train. You pick your phone up, and and at that point in particular, the news is really ramping up about coronavirus. And there was one day where and you know that sort of feeling in your stomach where something feels a bit uncertain, or you feel a bit anxious about something, and you're not quite processing it properly. And I remember there's one day that I picked my phone up, and there was a news alert on my phone about the Canadian tourist industry being really worried about the effects of coronavirus, panic in Canada, and all the sort of trigger words, right? Panic, virus, pandemic, outbreak, uncertain future for Canadian tourist industry. And I felt that churn in my stomach. I felt that kind of like just that churn of anxiety. And I thought, I can't panic about the Canadian tourist industry. I haven't got the capacity to panic about the Canadian tourist industry. That's just not something that I should be processing in the way that I'm processing. And so I did what Ian has been so brilliant at doing and so brave at doing. And I spoke to the bosses at Talk Radio, and I said, listen, this is how I'm feeling. I feel like I just need a week off just to reset. And that made the world of difference. And I think one of the things that was also at that period of time, one of the things that was also really getting at me was that we'd followed this story, because we do a lot of international news stories because of the time of the day on the program. We'd followed this story since January, and the initial outbreak of the coronavirus in China. And so we'd watched it rumble and rumble and rumble and rumble. And we were taking stock of what was going on in other countries around the world and the outbreaks across Europe. And we were covering this story more than anybody else was covering this story. And I was also really struggling with the fact that I was worried about it and nobody else was worried about it. And it came, I think, at the point at which everybody else started to really worry about it, where I relaxed. I was like, okay, good. You're all crapping yourself like I am. Brilliant. That's excellent. And you're, because also just recognizing that people needed to be on high alert and taking the precautions that they needed to take and doing all the things they needed to do to protect everybody else. That was a really interesting time. It was a really interesting time. Yeah. And I think you have to be conscious of how badly that sort of stuff affects you, and knowing when to take a pause and being brave enough to take a pause as well.
And I can imagine that since the outbreak and since everything has kind of come into the lap of more than just yourself, because you were looking around the world and seeing this come, and now it's come to us. Are you noticing while you're presenting that there's more calls and more text and more interaction? Because a lot of people have noticed that.
Hugely, absolutely incredible. I mean, what happened in that the week that I returned, it skyrocketed, and so when I took over this show in September, the focus of the show that Paul did wasn't really about interaction. It wasn't really about that. It was a brilliant show, and it was fantastically engaging and a great listen. But I came in and I made a conscious decision that I was going to try to really build in more interaction and really throw the doors of the radio station at that time of the day open to people to call. By the way, that's absolutely not a criticism of Paul or the previous production of the program. It was just the decision that was taken, right? It was just the way that it worked. It was a brilliant show. He continues to do a brilliant show, and I'm sure we'll come on to talking about the fact that he's going to do another great show as well when he returns to that time of the day on Talk Radio soon. But it was just my thing. I just really wanted to do that, and so I noticed a real gradual build of that over the course of the months that I was kind of building that into the program. And then come March, it exploded. And there was one call that really, really stood out to me. And it was a guy called Stephen. And he'd spotted a girl in a doorway. And it was about 20 past 4 a.m. And he was in floods of tears, and he couldn't level with the fact that this homeless girl had been left on the street at this horrible period of time. She was really vulnerable and all of that kind of stuff. And he was really deeply upset about that. And he said this sentence. He said, I'm sorry, I just didn't know who else to call. And so he called me, and he called the radio at that time of the day. And we heard from hundreds of people in the last couple of months who've been in that same situation, who've been people who've been in care homes. One guy who was in a care home, he was hanging out the window to try and get a signal out of this care home, and so as to not wake the people up. And I think 4 of the people that he'd befriended at this care home had died. And he just felt compelled to call and talk to somebody about that. People who wanted to speculate about conspiracy theories, or have a go at the government, or support the government, or just tell us how they were feeling in this really weird period of time. It really felt like we'd come together as a community at that time of the day, like I've never experienced before. It has been absolutely stunning. It's been such a privilege to be the custodian of that time of the day when people have felt the need to reach out and to hopefully provide that lifeline for people. It's been incredible. I've seen the power of radio like I've never seen it before, Jamie. I truly have. It's been incredible.
Well, radio is an intimate medium anyway, but then propelled with that time of night where you do feel more relaxed, more kind of open, I suppose, and that's what you're there for.
Totally, absolutely, yeah. And I've made that a part of our modus operandi on this program, is that the sun's gone down, the rough and tumble of the day is finished. It's quiet. We can really think about what we can really kind of process what we really think about the news. And that was one of the things is that we've tried to get the right balance between news, which is actually obviously what the radio station does. We never wanted to betray what the radio station was about. People come to talk radio for current affairs, but also doing enough stuff that kind of feels a bit different and has a different angle on it, and is a bit friendlier and a bit cuddlier and a little bit more kind of human, I think. But we've said from the start, this is a place where people can come together, say what they need to say, be honest. We can explore every element of the human condition. We can tell each other how we feel. I'll tell you how I see the world. You tell me how you see the world, and hopefully we come away friends and better informed. The intimacy at that time of the day really lends itself to being able to do that. And in the last couple of months, it's been just sensational seeing all of those things come together at exactly the right moment to provide a place for people to come and to talk and to share how they feel and to find things out. And to understand themselves and understand others. And I know that sounds really lofty and a bit elitist, but I hope that makes sense, because that's what we've worked really hard to try to make the show that. And seeing that flourish in the last couple of weeks and months has just been such a privilege, really. As we record this, last night's program was coming off the weekend of the protests and violence in London, with the racists, the far right people who were sort of apparently there to protect statues, but ultimately descended into violence and some hideous racism. And that is really difficult. It's really, really difficult because the nature of talk radio, speech radio, is that some of those people are going to be listening, people who are sympathetic to them, and so it's a difficult kind of. What I don't want to do is just shout that down, really. I want to be able to sort of in a sense understand it, or try to understand it, but I'm also going to be firm and give my opinion on it, particularly when it's something like that, right? There are some things that are that have ambiguity, and that are nuanced. The show last night, for me, at the start at least, didn't really have any ambiguity attached to it. Actually what we saw was some really hideous behavior and some really hideous people. And it's knowing the difference on this show between those moments that you need to call that stuff out and the moments that your opinion on that sort of stuff is pretty solid, and those moments where actually you're not 100% sure how you feel about something. And I think actually sometimes when you're not 100% sure about something, those are the times that are the most interesting. And those are the times that you get the most calls, and you get the most interesting calls when you can say. And a better example of that, a good example of that, was last week when we were talking about the removal of Little Britain and Fawlty Towers. And I was sort of saying, my perspective on that was, we're getting into some weird territory here where this really important debate about Black Lives Matter is being really diluted by this ridiculous debate about Fawlty Towers. and I'm just not sure how I mean, is it offensive, that episode of Faulty Towers? I mean, how do I feel about that? And a guy called up, Michael in Blackfriars, and he said, listen, I am a black guy, and I remember watching, I think it might have been Love Thy Neighbor or I think Love Thy Neighbor, I think it was, and he was basically saying that he sort of grew up watching that program, and he would go to in the playground the next day. He would feel emboldened by the black character, because the black character in it was an educated, quite sophisticated guy who always had the upper hand, really, didn't he?
Yeah.
Intellectually,
played by Rudolph Walker. Yes,
absolutely, yes. Latterly of EastEnders, he was in EastEnders, wasn't he?
Mm-hmm.
And the other chap, who was a bigot, basically, in Michael's eyes, was the butt of the joke. But what was really interesting is that when he went to the playground the next day, the kids who were in the playground, who were the bullies, who were the sort of racist bullies who he encountered all the time, felt emboldened by the bigoted character, and he felt emboldened by the black character. And so what you end up with there is a situation where you will get out of that program what you want to get out of that program. Little Britain is very complicated, but there's a character which has come up for a lot of debate. There's I think she's sort of like some WI woman who projectile vomits whenever she hears that a cake that she's just eaten has been baked by a black person or a disabled person or whatever. And the butt of the joke in that piece of satire is clearly her. We're laughing at her bigotry. But if you are a bigot and you want to laugh at how disgusting black people's cakes are, then you could probably find that in that comedy, right? You could probably come away from that feeling like you've laughed at the black person. So actually, the point that I'm making is those really nuanced conversations about, is that scene in Little Britain offensive? And having a black guy call up and say, well, I laughed at the bigot, and having somebody call up and say, no, I definitely felt like it was offensive. They're so much more interesting. That's when it becomes really, really interesting. And those are the conversations that really, to be honest, you can really only have at that time of the day. Because the rest of the day is so busy and things are moving so quickly, and the output on the rest of the day is so intense that just taking 20 minutes out to discuss a scene on Little Britain is a very special thing to do at 1 o'clock in the morning that you can't really do elsewhere.
And being able to slow down at night, as you say, is kind of the point of late night radio. Being able to take it slowly, and of course, you're about to get a whole lot more time, I would imagine, in your schedule because of the changes happening to Talk Radio. Paul Ross is about to simulcast over TalkSport and Talk Radio after previously holding the position. How did you feel when you heard that news that you'd be moving to weekends?
How did I feel? That's a very good question. My initial reaction, well, okay, it's quite telling, I guess, of how I feel is my initial reaction. And my initial reaction was a sense of relief, I think, to be honest. I felt a great sense of relief that I was going to claw some of my life back, that I was going to get to sleep. But that was very quickly followed by a sense of sadness that I was going to be leaving this community behind. I've made like some of the regular callers and the regular texters have genuinely become my friends. I feel, and some of the regular contributors as well that we have on different subjects. Various nights we have sort of people who come on and do a regular slot with us. John LaBoutier is a great guest. He's a former Republican congressman. So he's on the right of politics in America, but really hates Donald Trump. So his perspective is really, really interesting. And I love chatting to him every Friday morning. He's just such a fantastically engaging guy. And we have a bunch of people who come on and do regular things for us. And so initially I thought I'll really miss them. But I'm also really looking forward to, we were saying earlier on that 4 hours every day in the middle of the night, plus an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours of pre-records. So we start pre-recording at about 10:30, usually through until about midnight. I've then got about an hour or so to sort of gather my thoughts, to have a cup of tea, take a pause, and then we're on at 1. It's really relentless, and there's really only you can't be absolutely brilliant for all of that time. I can't be talking for 8 hours a day, every day, and be absolutely fantastic at every single second of it. It's just not realistic. So what I'm really looking forward to is I'm going to do it's 5 till 7, Saturday and Sunday morning. I'm really looking forward to just being able to take everything that I've learned in the last 10 months and apply it to 4 hours a week and just really, really, really hammer it. So a bit of a mixed bag. And it was a business decision for talk radio. We're walking into an economic apocalypse. Everybody's struggling a little bit. And it seems, News UK, I don't know a huge amount about the business side of it, but News UK seems to be quite robust as a business, but they have to make difficult decisions like the rest of the world at the moment. They've also just invested in Times Radio, which is I think Times Radio's lineup's really great, but it's probably quite costly if we're honest, because they've got some top talent there, and so they have to make some savings, and it's I know that business decisions are always really difficult, but this business decision will have been made a lot easier by the fact that Paul Ross, whose show is going to be simulcast onto Talk Radio from Talk Sport, is a fantastic broadcaster. Really looking forward to seeing how he does that and how he's such a great broadcaster and such a diligent broadcaster. He's so able to step really neatly between the sport and the other content, and also make the sporting content not too sporty that it alienates an audience that aren't sporty, but is sporty enough to satisfy an audience that are listening to TalkSport. I mean, that is a skill and a half that Paul Ross has got down there. It really, really, really is. I can't think of anybody on the schedule who could do that better than he could. So it's going to be great, and I think I do think it's a bit of a win-win-win situation, to be honest, which is very rare. Those things don't come along very often. So yeah, I'm mainly excited to get started on this new thing.
This is a question I normally ask on this podcast, mainly because we know that certainly all the radio experts always say that in order to be a great radio presenter, you have to kind of listen around to others. What are you listening to?
It's a really good question. Yeah, absolutely. Listening is so important. I listen to a breadth of everything, really, as much as I possibly can. When I was doing music radio, I always used to listen to speech radio. I very, very rarely used to listen to music radio outside of, which is probably not a great thing, to be honest, but outside of listening to the links of presenters, right? So I used to listen back to stuff rather than listening live. And I wondered if when I joined speech radio or just started doing talk radio, that if I would go the other way, and I'd much prefer to listen to music because it's not what I do all day, speech radio. Actually, it's not true. I've stuck with listening to speech radio, so that's quite good. So obviously, I listen to kind of consume as much talk radio as I can. So it's good to kind of know what's going on the schedule, what's going on elsewhere, what else is happening, what other people are talking about as well, and the kind of angles that they're taking on things, which helps you form an opinion, or it helps you know what to do and what not to do later in the day. I listen to a lot of LBC. I think it's really important to keep an eye on the competition. I also think it's a great radio station. I don't really buy into the having to slag the competition off thing, to be honest. I think they make some fantastic radio on LBC. I listen to a lot of 5 Live. And for music, I listen to Virgin Radio and Absolute Radio quite a lot. And I'm a big podcast listener as well, actually. I've got a lot of podcasts on the go. I'm a big fan of Adam Buxton's podcast. I like Danny Wallace. I'm a big Danny Wallace fan. He's somebody whose career I've kind of followed for a long time now, from his early books and his early TV stuff and his radio stuff at XFM. We very briefly worked together at XFM, but in different cities and at different times of the day. So our paths didn't really cross. And I've interviewed him a couple of times. And he followed me on Twitter recently. We've had a little bit of Twitter back and forth recently. And he is somebody that I really like in terms of kind of having really great ideas, being a really great ideas person. Yeah, that probably covers the breadth of it, to be honest with you. And Louis Theroux's new podcast as well is really good. I don't know if you've heard that, Grounded with Louis Theroux.
Yeah, I have. It's extremely good.
I don't think that is his forte. If I was going to offer a criticism, I don't think that those kind of audio interviews are his forte. I think he's much better on television, but I think he made a real good go of it. Actually, he managed to get some very, very interesting stuff out of those people in quite a difficult format. And John Ronson is I'm a big fan of as well, in terms of people who kind of create content. He had a fantastic podcast called The Butterfly Effect, where he traced the effect that Pornhub has basically had on the porn industry, right? And so and it was like some amazing stories, and he met some incredible people, and he sort of went from point to point on that over a series. I think I'd quite like to do that next. I think probably with this newfound time, I think doing some sort of documentary kind of series is probably on the cards, on the radar. So I'm going to really entomb myself in a lot of those kind of things. I'm going to bathe in them to hear lots of those things. But I think just listen to a breadth of stuff, listen to all sorts of different styles, all sorts of different people, and I think that's certainly how you learn.
Yeah, it is, and podcasting is the future. I think most of the people that I've spoken to have all said that they're all ardent podcast listeners, probably accelerated by the fact that we're in lockdown, and some people are interested in all the news that's going on. Other people want an escape, and of course podcasting can be a great escape for that. When does the overnight show start? On weekends?
Weekends, early breakfast at the weekends, and it starts. I don't know actually. That's actually a really good question. I don't know. I've literally texted the boss today saying, when shall we end this show and start the other one? I think it'll probably be the first weekend of July.
So when you say early breakfast, what times are we talking about? Do you know that yet?
Yes, it's 5 a.m. till 7 a.m. Saturday and Sunday morning, before the mighty Penny Smith comes on. That's another very exciting bit, is I'll be working in close proximity with Penny Smith, who I have long enjoyed on the television. I used to wake up to her on GMTV, and she used to present GMTV many years ago. She does the weekend breakfast show, so that'll be exciting. So yeah, it'll be 5 till 7 Saturday and Sunday morning.
Well, I'm sure many people will be looking out for a start date on that, and I'm sure at the moment that you find out, you'll be telling everybody. How are you finding the social media thing? Because some presenters aren't a big fan of the mass amount of participation that happens, and obviously all the comments and everything. How do you find that?
I like that mass amount of participation. That's a very interesting way of describing being piled on by people who hate you. It's tough. I'm not going to lie. It's really tough. You'll often hear people say things like, it's water off a duck's back, and you've got to have a thick skin, and it's all part and parcel of the job. And all those things are true to a point. But the honest truth is that if you are a human being, you're going to be affected by that kind of stuff. If anybody tells you that they're not affected by relentlessly being slagged off on the internet, or people texting their radio show to tell them that they're a swear word, they're either lying to you or they're a psychopath. Either way, spend less time with them, because it's human nature to feel affected by that sort of stuff. And it is the case that you can have. When I announced the move last week, I had, if I may say so, streams of people saying nice things, and then a handful of people who were sort of quite keen to express their delight at the change. And you carry those people with you. You carry those people who are slagging you off with you, and that's just human nature. And you have to find coping mechanisms to process that kind of thing. But yeah, it's tough. I'm not gonna sit here and say it's not difficult. Yeah, it's really, really difficult. Yeah, and it really, really hurts. And we have to be better. We have to be nicer to each other. We have to be conscious of what we're saying to people. I think people can feel that. I wrote another article about this some time ago when I took over I took over the breakfast show on Rock FM, and I took over from two guys who'd done it for years and years, and there was one that it was sort of quite early on in the whole sort of trolling situation, and so this feels like just part of the course now. But somebody called me up at 7:30 in the morning and said, "I hate you. I hate this radio show. Can you tell me when your contract ends so that I can come and start listening to Rock FM again?" And I just thought, and actually, here's an interesting thing: is that person never stopped listening, because I know that he came back and he started contributing to the show eventually, and he'd text in, to text-ins and stuff like that. And I always remember, like, whenever I got a message from him, thinking, "You're a horrible person. Why on earth are you engaging with the radio show? You promised me that you'd go and listen to something else." And I just remember thinking, who are these people? Who's the kind of person who can pick up the radio, who can pick up the phone at 7:30 in the morning and tell something, say something so awful to somebody? And the honest truth is that it's all of us. We're all part of this ecosystem. We all have to be careful what we do and don't tweet to each other, and and being abusive to each other. And it's very easy to feel like you're exercising your right to criticize, when actually you're just being a mindless troll. And there's a very fine line between those two things, and I think that for a lot of people don't quite see them. I'm not going to lie and pretend that it's not difficult. And the other difficult bit when we're talking about social media as well is feeling like you constantly have to have a take on something, and feeling like you constantly want to sort of have a, you want to tweet something that's going to get loads of retweets and here's what I think about something. When you're in this job and you're in this position, having a take on something, constantly having a take on something is kind of important. It's kind of part of the job, and it's quite that's quite tiring. And there are definitely days like today actually is one of those days where I typed something out on Twitter and I was like, that's a crap tweet. And I'm only tweeting that because I feel like I need to be part of the conversation. Whereas actually, I don't need to be part of the conversation. I don't need to have a take on that. Take a step back. Nobody's going to think any less of you because you didn't comment on this particular thing. Take a bit of pressure off yourself. It just adds to the pressure. And I think all those wonderful things that you and I, Jamie, love about the radio. It's intimacy and how real it is and how honest it is and all of those wonderful things that you can and the craft of it. None of those exist on social media. It's the polar opposite of all of the things that we love about broadcasting. And so when you take your broadcasting and your brand and your proposition and you have to do social media in order to kind of build your profile, etc. I suddenly sort of thought, like, I don't like this. The reason that I got into radio was to craft wonderful things in a very intimate setting, and a part of my job has ended up being swimming in this cesspit of horrible hatred where you can't be nuanced and there's no craft to it, and it's really unpleasant. And so I'm not enjoying it at all, Jamie, if I'm honest with you. But there you are.
Aside from talk radio, what else are you doing at the moment?
That's a very good question. Very, very little, because as I said, the nature of this, the relentless nature of the show that I've been hosting has not allowed me any time to do anything other than it. Really, I wake up in the afternoon and I look at what the news is, and then I prepare some interviews. We invariably do about 12 guests a night, right? So that's 12 interviews that I've got to prep, 12 different subject matters usually that I've got to read up on. I need to know what's going on in the news. We spend invariably about 8 hours literally working on the show, as in recording or being live. So it doesn't leave a lot of the day to do anything else. I have a little content production company that I run with a friend of mine. And that's really fun, actually, because we get to like pitch ideas and work with other people on ideas and do some consultancy. That's going to pick up a bit after I leave the show, I think. I'm going to do a little bit of writing, I think. I've got an idea for something that I'd like to write that, you never have the time to do it. So I'm going to do that. And maybe I'd like to do some sort of John Ronson-esque factual, investigative podcast piece. I don't know about you, but finding the niche for a podcast is really hard, isn't it? It's sort of what's my niche? What am I going to do that nobody else is doing? I just don't think the world needs another interview series. This is obviously not. This is different because we're talking about radio. But I don't think the internet I don't think the world needs another sort of just random two people sit down for a chat about nothing specific series. Having the right idea.
I think there are many series out there that are just two people talking, and they'll say, well, I'll cover anything and everything. And you think, but who's your target market for that? And certainly I get stats for this podcast, and I must say the stats really surprise me. And of course, it helps you to go on to the next thing. It helps you to organize future things. And of course, I'm sure you find that when you're doing the talk radio show that you'll do an interview and maybe it won't go quite as well as you'd hope. So this isn't a dud. It simply informs what I'll do next time.
Yeah, that's very, very true. That's a really, really good point. That's a really, really good point. One of the benefits of having so much airtime, doing 4 hours a night, is that you can have a dud hour or a couple of dud interviews. And actually, it doesn't define the program because there's lots of other stuff in there as well. And you get through an interview and you think, oh God, you know what? I was just not prepared enough for that interview, or I didn't ask the right questions, or I didn't have the right frame of mind during that interview. And so you can gear change into the next thing. And you can carry that knowledge through into the rest of the show, and you can improve the show. Having the stats and having the sort of immediate feedback on exactly how many people listened and when they turned off and what they did and didn't like, that absolutely terrifies me. We've talked about doing a podcast for talk radio, of maybe grouping some of the best bits of the show and perhaps a little bit of extra, and doing a weekly podcast of the new show. And I've sort of hesitated slightly, because as much as that's obviously great for all sorts of reasons, the idea that sort of like nobody will listen to it just really terrifies me. Whereas, at least there's definitely an audience for the radio, because people come to listen to the radio regardless of who's on. And we don't find out how many people are actually listening for many, many months until it's gone. So you can sort of like discard it and forget about it and not attach yourself to it. The immediacy of the stats and the information about who's listening really scares me. So I think that's something that I need to kind of wrap my head around before I delve into that world.
Yeah, well, Darryl Morris, I'd like to say thank you very much for being on the podcast today and talking about your experience in radio, and all the best with the new early breakfast show at the weekend as well.
Thank you, Jamie. I really appreciate it. Really nice to talk to you. I think you do some fine work. It's been a joy and a pleasure to talk to somebody who is so enthusiastic about radio for a bit. Keep doing your thing.